Hello, I'm writer Robert Ford, and this is the opening of my brand new horror western, Blood Roses. Chapter 1. Sure you won't come with me? Twyla stared for a moment and then sat down in the high-backed red velvet chair beside Claudia's desk. She chewed on her bottom lip and ran her hands over one another as she stared at them. Miss Claudia, I want you to be happy, but I don't want you to go. Leaving all of this. All of this? Claudia stepped closer and knelt in front of the young woman. Twyla, you say that like it's some sort of heaven out here. There's more to the world, much more. Beautiful waters, sand, places with no harsh winters or wind made of knives that'll cut through to the bone. This is the only thing I've ever known. The girl's eyes were glassy, and Claudia reached out to put a hand against the side of Twyla's beautiful face. I remember when you first came to me, barely 13, crying and hurting, and Claudia waved away her words with a black velvet gloved hand. I hadn't been to Thurmont except for a few months. It was after I left the riots up in Denver. Hell, I'd just opened the place and barely had $50 to my name. But the girls were willing, and the house grew. She pulled her hand away and smiled. I took you in, healed you, gave you a safe place to be. Claudia stood and crossed the room, stopping in front of the open safe. And now look at us. Stacks of paper money rested on a shelf inside the safe. You and me have come a long way, Twyla. I couldn't have got here without you. You're my little China doll. This is as much yours as it is mine. Silent tears spilled over the Chinese woman's cheeks. Claudia closed the door of the safe and walked back to her, took the girl's hands in hers, and gently pulled her to stand. Claudia embraced the girl and whispered, "It's never too late to be the person you want to be." Claudia felt the young woman relax, and then Twyla returned the hug tightly. It was like this with a lot of the girls, being a big sister, mother, leader, friend. All of them were frail but strong at the same time. What some of them had been through would have made so many others give up the ghost long ago. Twyla had been discarded like rubbish after her mother had died of consumption. The girl had fought her way through life tooth and nail ever since. The embrace ended, but as she withdrew, Claudia held the woman's hands. Twyla smiled. I'll follow you, Miss Claudia. You know I will. Don't follow, just come with me. Shouldn't be more than a few months, and we'll have enough money to go. Start clean, fresh. Twyla's smile widened, and she nodded. The doors to Claudia's office burst open, and a petite brunette woman stood in the threshold, crying and trying to catch her breath. They found them, Miss Claudia. Found who, Becca? Laura Ann and Jenny. A trickle of ice water ran down Claudia's spine. She wasn't sure she wanted to know, but she knew it was something she needed to know. Morning, Miss Claudia. Morning, Doc. She scanned the man's face and found it pale as sun-bleached bones. My girl's in there? Afraid so. I ain't never. He glanced back toward the door of the undertaker and cleared his throat before turning back. They were good women, and I'm sorry. Claudia took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Rest of the girls doing all right? For the most part, Doc, and I thank you for asking. Doc nodded. I'll be on by in a day or so to check 'em over. He gently patted Claudia's shoulder and stepped from the porch of the undertaker's building. Claudia steeled herself and went inside. Heinrich Fischer was a quiet man with a thick frost of white hair on his head. He walked with a cane when the weather turned cold and his joints ached. Once in a blue moon, Heinrich visited the saloon, but he mostly kept to his own business, which was a steady one. Dying was one thing the living kept on doing. The old German looked up from the two sheet-covered bodies on his work table to the woman before him. I want to see him, Mr. Fisher. Miss Claudia. He adjusted his spectacles and shook his head slightly. I don't think maybe you should. Well, why not? The animals got to them. And I don't think a lady... You paying for the goddamn coffins? The thought of animals ravaging the girls' corpses made Claudia's stomach turn, but his words made a hot streak of anger run through her. Turning away, Heinrich fidgeted with the edge of one of the sheets. He shook his head. No, ma'am. All right, then. In fact, leave me be with him a bit. Heinrich nodded and reached for a pipe and a leather pouch from his desk. He took them both and walked outside. She stared at the thin shapes beneath the sheets for a moment. Still. Quiet, save for the occasional trot and snort of horses outside. Claudia flipped the fabric away and saw the faces of the two women she had come to know as daughters. Laura Ann and Jenny were as gray as smoke from a green wood fire. Their eyes had been eaten away to dark hollows, and their chapped and broken lips had been gnawed on, leaving them to greet death with harsh smiles. Claudia released a slow and wavering breath. Beneath their pale faces, gouges around their necks left bruised necklaces. Claudia's breath caught in her chest. That ice water trickle returned to her spine as she peeled the sheet down further. Their dresses had been torn, exposing bare flesh. Sleeves ripped off at the shoulders. The same deep bruising circled their wrists. Rope burns. Her stomach flipped and Claudia began to shake. She pulled Laura Ann's dress up to see the girl's hip, already knowing what she was going to find. Against the gray flesh, the angry scar tissue of a brand. Bile rose to the back of Claudia's throat, and she bit her lip. Blood hit her tongue, the copper taste galvanizing her. She lifted the shredded remains of Jenny's dress and saw the same brand against her hip bone. The scar twisted and distorted, as if the girl had struggled when it had been applied. Hissing. The sound of red-hot iron against smooth, bare skin, smelling sweet, like fresh bacon in a skillet. Claudia closed her eyes and pulled the sheet up to cover the girls again. The sound of wagon wheels slicing through mud greeted her as she stepped outside on the undertaker's porch. The old German leaned against a post, puffing on his pipe. Give him a proper coffin and burial, and I'll settle the cost. You know where to find me. Yes, ma'am. Heinrich tapped his pipe against the wooden column and let the smoking tobacco fall to the dirt before he stepped inside to resume working. Claudia stared at the wagons making their way down the street. A big Conestoga rolled through first, stopping by the livery stables. She couldn't imagine living in the house on wheels. A family living in such close quarters while building a homestead seemed enough to drive a person half crazy. A second wagon rolled past, uncovered and loaded down with equipment. Two men looking fresh and unworked rode the bench, while four others sat in back. It was easy to pick out the new men coming to find gold. They still had hope in their eyes. Looks like a new batch of customers for Chateau de Roses. She recognized the voice, but didn't turn toward the man. Might be. The third wagon was full and covered, but not by oiled canvas stretched over rails. This was a small black building mounted on a wagon and pulled by a 4-horse team of grays. A wooden sign tacked to the side proclaimed Miss Garcia's traveling parlor of divination and curiosities. Claudia turned around. Knowing a thing about what happened to my girls, Sam? I'm sorry about 'em, Miss Claudia. Do you know anything about what happened or not? They's found up near Baker's ranch by his boy, out gathering some stray sheep. Said he had to shoot off a few coyotes sniffing around. Not sure what critters got to him for that. And how'd they come to end up there? The man straightened from where he had been leaning against the building. People do what they do. Most of us ain't much more than wild critters ourselves. Critters put them rope burns on 'em too, Sheriff? Round their wrists and neck? Now, Miss Claudia, You have a good day, Sheriff. Claudia stepped into the mud of Main Street and headed toward the comfort of Chateau de Roses. Chapter 2. "What you're thinking about them rope burns, Heinrich?" The old German shrugged and shook his head. "Something bad?" "Well, no shit, something bad." The sheriff sighed. The coffins were yet to be made, but soon enough the girls would be living below snakes in a cemetery off behind St. John's Church. "Heinrich, you've been the undertaker since Thurmont was 2 horses in a whiskey barrel. Any thoughts more profound than that?" Heinrich pulled the sheet away from the bottom of the girls' corpses to reveal their bare feet. "No shoes." "No shoes." Sam gritted his teeth. "Well, thanks for that, Heinrich. What the hell does..." The sheriff turned his focus on the soles of the girls' feet. Blistered and busted up, riddled with slashes and punctures against the soft, smooth skin. These girls weren't used to going barefoot. Hell, soiled doves rarely did, even when they were on their backs getting poked by a customer. Took longer to unlace their shoes and put them back on again than the time spent entertaining. The sheriff studied the feet of the girls, missing patches of skin, dried blood. His gaze shifted from Laura Ann to Jenny. The girl's right foot was twisted at an odd angle. Sam pointed at it and eyed the old man. "The girl's ankle is broken." Sheriff Stockton straightened up and nodded. From the looks of their feet, they'd come a long way. Laura Ann had to have helped Jenny make it as far as they had. He turned his attention higher on Jenny's body, seeing circular burn marks polka-dotting her skin. He saw the raised scar tissue of a brand mark on both of the girl's hips. His gaze landed on the hands of Laura Ann. Beneath several of her fingernails were jagged lines and crusts of dried blood. "What are those from?" Heinrich shook his head slightly and gave a shrug. "I think maybe thorns, mesquite." "That don't happen from running off through the wild." Heinrich shook his head, pursed his lips, and ran a hand over the snow-colored down of his hair. Sam ran a hand over his face, wincing beneath it. "Someone was shoving mesquite thorns under this girl's fingernails?" "I think so, yes." "Great Christ." The sheriff cleared his throat and sighed. "All right, then. Go on and put him to rest." "Thanks, Heinrich." Sam stepped out of the undertaker's office and stood on the porch, his mind chewing over what he had seen. He considered a smoke, if for nothing else than to replace the stink of death coiled up in his nose. Those women made it quite a distance, trying to escape whoever it was that had him in ropes. Whatever, was putting him through hell. The sheriff spat into the street. It had been simple here in town for quite some time. Things were bound to get all twisted up once in a while. He sighed and spat again. Chapter 3. "Pour me some whiskey, would you, John?" The bartender set his towel on the bar top and raised an eyebrow at Claudia. "Whiskey, John." Claudia leaned against the bar and pointed to the shelves behind him. "In fact, give me the whole goddamn bottle of Kessler." The man hesitated a moment more and then handed her a near-full bottle of amber liquid. "You all right, Miss Claudia?" "I'm fine." She grabbed the bottle of Kessler whiskey by the neck and took a glass along with her. "Fine as peach jam." "Where's Twyla?" "Entertaining right now, but she should be done shortly." "Send her in to me when she comes down." Claudia marched into her office and closed the double doors behind her. She sat down in the chair behind her desk and put the bottle and glass in front of her. For a moment she just breathed, trying to get the trembling inside her under control. It didn't pass. Claudia bit the cork off the bottle between her teeth, twisted it loose, and then poured a few fingers' worth into her glass. "You're marked now, darling. Marked as ours. Ain't no use trying to get away." She raised the glass with a shaking hand, almost dropped it, and then used both gloved hands to lift it to her mouth and take a drink before she set it down again. The whiskey burned her throat and turned to flame when it hit her stomach. but did nothing to melt the ball of ice sitting there. Claudia swiveled to look through her window out on Main Street. The black wagon had parked in front of the general store, probably stocking up on supplies. People came through like that sometimes, mostly settlers or miners or homesteaders looking to make a new life, but other times it was the traveling man, selling tinctures and ointments, cure for damn near everything, so they said. Last year, an entire caravan of wagons set up on the east side of town, rows of big red and white striped tights with freaks inside. She and Twyla had gone to see the mermaid lady, the strong man, and the wolf boy. Even had a woman growing a beard as long as Claudia's forearm. The world was a strange place at times. She managed to lift her glass with one hand, and though it still shook, it wasn't as bad. Claudia relished the burn of the liquor inside her. A soft knock on her door turned Claudia's attention. Yes. Twyla walked in and closed the door behind her. She took a step inside and stopped, the woman's gaze flitting from the bottle of whiskey to Claudia's face. She opened her mouth to say something and then closed it again. Twyla, you seen any new customers come in lately? Strangers? Ones that like to get rough before a poke, maybe instead of a poke? The young woman shook her hand. A couple new railroaders and a young ranch hand up at Baker's, but no, ma'am, no one getting rough. Claudia nodded. You keep an eye out, all right? From now on, any strangers come in, you get me first, you hear? I want to see 'em with my own eyes. Twyla sat down in the velvet chair. You all right? Fine. The girl's gaze caressed the bottle of whiskey. Was they bad? Laura Ann and Jenny? They's dead. It's all that matters. Claudia pulled at the edge of her gloves and adjusted the matching velvet choker around her neck. Her eyes stung, but she held the tears at bay. Is Heinrich gonna... They'll have a proper burial. Claudia sniffled and stared at the Chinese girl. Hey, hun, you still got that regular of yours, the Chinaman? Mm-hmm. Once a week. He's a railroader, yeah? He know any English? What you'd expect. Twyla shrugged. Eat, drink, piss, shit, fuck, sleep, money. Claudia laughed, but it was empty of humor. Sounds about right. Hey, do me a favor. Anything. Claudia reached into a drawer and pulled out a silver dollar, slid it across the desk. Give this to William down at the livery stables. Write a note to your Chinaman and tell him to come see me tonight. Tell William to deliver it as quickly as he can. Twyla cocked her head and raised an eyebrow. Oh, no, you know me better. It ain't like that. I ain't looking for a poke. Claudia sipped from her glass of whiskey. And if he's got a few friends, have him bring them along, too. 4 or 5 others should do. Miss Claudia, are you sure? Go on now. Hurry on with that message before it gets too late. Twyla's gaze held a moment longer, and then she hurried from the room. Claudia tossed back the rest of the whiskey in her glass and swirled it in her mouth before she swallowed. A harsh winter wind howled inside her. So there's the first 3 chapters of, again, my new Western horror novella, Blood Roses. It is available on Amazon in hardback, paperback, and Kindle. And it's so many fine retailers online, Barnes & Noble, Target, Walmart, you name it. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much.